How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Buddy's House of Horror podcast, and welcome to my review of VHS 85, a review that I've put off doing for a while. I meant to do it last year, didn't do it, but we're doing it right here, right now, on Buddy's House of Horror podcast. Before we get to the episode, make sure you guys are subscribing to the show wherever you get the show, whether it be Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, over on YouTube. Wherever you are watching the show, make sure you're leaving me a rating, a review, subscribing, leaving me a comment, spreading the good word about Buddy's House of Horror, telling all of your friends who are in the spooky realm that this is the premier 5-star horror podcast on the internet. And with that, we're going to get to my review of VHS 85. So now it is time to get spooky. Alright, boys and ghouls, we have put this review off long enough. I've been procrastinating this review for basically a year. I wanted to do this during the 2023 Buddy's House of Horror Marathon, but for whatever reason, I couldn't bring myself to actually sit down and review this film. When I had first watched it, I don't remember the exact day I watched it. I want to say it was around the time that it had come out. I want to say it was either that opening weekend or maybe a few days later, but I remember watching it under very odd circumstances. I remember being very, very rushed to watch this film. I remember Jared and Maisie were coming over that evening, so I'd started the film, and they had actually showed up while the film was still going on, so I didn't really get the best viewing experience. I wasn't in the best headspace watching because I just felt a little bit rushed at the time, so I felt that I didn't feel like I was able to give the review the justice that it deserved. I knew watching the film on the initial first watch, I had several thoughts about the film, but I did not feel, I obviously, because I procrastinated it, obviously I didn't feel ready enough to review VHS 85. Obviously, I was going to do it that month, and then I was even going to think about doing it before the end of the year. And then the months kept turning into semesters, basically. The days turned into weeks, the weeks turned into months, and I'm not letting it turn into years. So what I actually did was I decided I was going to give the film a rewatch, have some fresh eyes on it, come into it with an open mind, because as I said, the original time I watched it, I thought it was absolute piss. I thought it was absolute dog shit the first time that I watched it. But I wanted to give it a fair shot. A lot of people on the internet were singing its praises. A lot of people were saying it was the most consistent VHS film out at that time. It was the most immersive. It was the best. It had the most engaging shorts in it. And when I watched it initially, I was like, what the hell are you people talking about? What the hell are you people talking about? Because I thought the film was a mess. I thought it was a mess. I gave it like 1.5 stars maybe on my first watch, but everyone on Letterboxd had 4 stars, 3.5 stars. I watched a few reviews at the time after I watched it originally because I was like, what am I missing? Like, what am I missing in this film that people have been singing its praises? People were singing the same praises for VHS Beyond, by the way. Everyone thinks that film is a masterpiece as well for some reason. So I wanted to give the film a rewatch. I rewatched it, and my opinion really hasn't changed that much since my first viewing. I'm still not the biggest fan of this film. It's hard with these VHS films that sort of are making themselves have a theme. VHS Beyond, of course, is all otherworldly type of stuff. Aliens, things of that nature. It's beyond our normal world. But prior to that, they had VHS 94, 99, and then this film, 85, which is restricting the films to a certain time period, which could be great, which could be a really amazing thing if these films really looked, felt like the time periods in which they are being created. The only, I guess, like for me, like a lot of these shorts, like changing minor details, Like, it doesn't necessarily need to take place in 85. Like, there's a lot of things that aren't super specific to the time period. I mean, they do have some stuff, but it's not like everyone is walking around as 80s counterculture. There's not Joy Division playing in the background of shorts. There's not a bunch of people, one way or the other, that look particularly from the 80s. There are some, and we'll talk about it, but a lot of it is time period ambiguous. Like, a lot of this stuff, like changing minor details, that could have been a modern day thing, could have been 90s, could have been 70s. There isn't anything specific that makes it feel like it's 1985. I mean, there are some things. I mean, obviously, the wraparound is in the style of an 80s made-for-TV special documentary. Again, some of the shorts have people that kind of look counterculture. But a lot of these things, like, it didn't need to be 85. I would say only 2 of the shorts, like, 100% feel like the 80s. And that's because there's at least one character in both that kind of looks and acts like it's from the 80s. Most of them, like, you could, if they had cell phones, you could have been like, okay, this is pretty much modern day. Like, there's not a lot that really makes it feel like you're in the 80s. I feel it had the same problems in VHS 99 and in 94. There's very few things in some of those that really make it feel like it's part of that time period. Obviously, there's little things that they do that make it feel like it's from that time period, but nothing specifically about the plot of a lot of these have to do with the time period. It just kind of feels, I don't know, it's kind of weird. Like, this one, one of them is definitely 100% something 80s. It feels 80s, it looks 80s. Another one has a character, just one specific character, that is goth. Like, you know what I mean? But everyone else is sort of time period ambiguous. So, like, it's kind of, I don't know, it's very weird. Like, even the fashion, like, yeah, they're wearing, like, older clothing, but it could have been 90s, could have been 70s. For me, these time period ones are very, very hard to pull off with that theming. Like, I thought VHS was better when it could be anything. You know what I mean? It could be anything. Those first 2 films, it could have been any time period. You could have done whatever you wanted with those. On VHS Viral, of course, it was all kind of like internet themed stuff. These time period ones, they're very hard to pull off and suspend your disbelief with a lot of these things, at least in my opinion. I mean, obviously the internet thinks very, very differently about this, but at least in my opinion, it's very, very hard to pull some of this off. Letterboxd description time. VHS 85, of course, from last year, 2023. Unveiled through a made-for-TV documentary, 5 chilling tales of found footage horror emerged to take viewers on a gore-filled journey through the grim underbelly of the forgotten 1980s. Again, and especially with, like, a film like 1985, like, it has so much potential. I mean, like, in 1985, like, you could go to rent a VHS at a store, I think. Like, VHS is just coming out and in prominence, like, in this time. Like, they could have done something with that, like someone going to a video store. Like, the film is called VHS. And again, like, there's not a ton that really, really makes it feel like it's 1985, at least in my opinion. I wasn't there in 1985. This could be the most historically accurate film of all time. And I would never know, but I'm just saying it doesn't feel like it to me. We're going to break down some of these segments. We're going to break down the wraparound, obviously, and kind of talk about these things one by one. The wraparound in this, as already mentioned, is a made-for-TV documentary called Total Copy. I like what they kind of do to introduce the documentary. Like, it starts like flicking through the channels until it lands on the documentary. Like, we see monster trucks, we see people dancing at the beach. That's very 80s, stuff like that. There's an ad for a cochlear implant, and then we finally land on our title card, Total Copy, which is our documentary style TV show from the 80s. So this first segment, it feels very 80s just because of what it is. If it wasn't, because like in VHS 99 and 94, like those ones, they didn't really have like a TV show centering all of this. So this intro segment really feels 80s. This is one of the true ones that feels like it's from the 80s, but it could have been from the 90s. Like it's not, again, it's not super time period ambiguous. It introduces the concept of what it is about before leading into the first real segment. Basically what happens is it is about essentially an alien that's being held in captivity by these scientists who are trying to study it. It's called Rory. He looks like a little boy. And again, it just kind of introduces this concept before moving into our first segment, which is called No Wake. No Wake is a segment about a bunch of kids that sneak into an off-limits beach, basically, to go water skiing. It's very reminiscent of a film I talked about on the show years ago called Blood Lake. It has a couple funny lines in it. Like there's a line where someone's talking about one of the girls and they say, "Oh, she's such a hottie," and then someone says, "Gross, that's my sister." But for the most part, like this segment is just not the most exciting. It's not the most exciting. It doesn't feel particularly super 80s about it. It's just people jet skiing. Basically what happens in the short is they all get murdered on this jet skiing adventure, and then some of them come back to life. And they're trying to figure out why. They're trying to figure out why some of them came back to life, some of them didn't, and there's a little bit of mystery involved. And this is one of the few segments that ties into a later segment within the same film. It's not very often that VHS has segments that kind of go together. So this one sort of picks up later on. Again, this is mostly spoiler free, so I'm not going to get into what the reveal is within this short, but some people lived, some people die. You try to figure out why. But like I said, this isn't the most exciting segment. Like this segment is very, very boring. Most of the time, the camera is just laying on the bottom of the boat while stuff is happening, and there's nothing to look at. It's a very, very poor segment, in my opinion. Not the hugest fan of No Wake. After that, we move back into another part of Total Copy, which is a short segment of showing them how they're introducing Rory, who still looks like a little boy, to our culture, showing him as much of our culture as they can, and they're doing it through having him watch television. And throughout this entire thing, it's basically Rory is in like a separate, what looks like a living room in this lab. There's the classic like police glass, and Rory's on one side and everyone's observing him on the other side. So it introduces that concept of it. So it's showing how they're trying to communicate with him, they're trying to study him, they're trying to learn what he is all about and teach him about who we are as people through television. So we do that, and then after we move on to a segment called God of Death. And this is another one that doesn't really feel like it. I mean, obviously it looks like it's in the 80s because it's an 80s TV station, but there's nothing about it that, once you get to what the segment is about, there's nothing about it that made it have to be in the 80s. Like, it could have been a news station in any time period. Like, the only reason we know it's the 80s is because it's shot on older-ish looking cameras, and we're told that it's in the 80s. There's nothing about it contextually that really, really feels like it. Basically, what happens is it's a news station. There is some sort of cataclysmic event. Again, this is mostly spoiler-free. And then it's part of the news crew trying to survive in, like, the underbelly ruins of this city after this happens. So it makes sense that they have cameras and they're following things around because the main character is a cameraman. My problem with it is it comes off more of like just a thriller, like a little action thriller instead of a horror, and it becomes a little horrific at the end. And of course, it's a scary situation. It's a scary situation if you were in the shoes of these characters trying to escape. Yes, that is a scary situation, but it just comes off more thriller vibe. Like, it doesn't really feel like a horror film for a lot of it. Watching it all go down just sort of just comes off as bland to me. I mean, there's a few jump scares peppered throughout it, like a random collapse of part of a building or random electrical flares and stuff like that. But for the bulk of it, there's not much going on. The writing in it, I feel, is very lame. Like, there's a fart joke in it. And I mean, like, I didn't pop on a VHS film to get jokes that you would see in Shrek or something like that. I mean, like, when it does become a horror segment at the end, I feel it just comes off like real cheesy. Like, it's really, really cheesy once the reveal happened, which is common for VHS films. But for me, it still just doesn't do it for me. Like, I'm not the biggest fan of this segment either. Like, that's the problem. Like, a lot of these segments in here, like, I just don't like a lot of the segments. Like, I like the wraparound. I like the closing segment, which we'll talk about, but a lot of these segments, I just feel like they're kind of mid or kind of bad. Before we get to the middle segment, we check back in with Rory. We see what's going on. These scientists are frustrated about the lack of progress. Like, they're still showing him shows, but they're not really getting a lot of progress communicating with him. But at this point, Rory is starting to look a little bit less human. He's starting to definitely get some mutations going on because, again, he is some sort of alien. So he's starting to look less and less how they want him to look. So that one's actually a very, very short aspect of the wraparound. We're only in there for just a little bit. It's just a quick one, and then it moves right on to the most memorable segment out of the entire film. Whenever I think of VHS 85, like, this is the segment that I immediately think of. I immediately think of this segment, Techno God, for better or for worse. I remember on first watch, this was the most memorable segment. Like, I remembered the other segments. I remembered what happened for the most part, but this is the one where it was, like, solidified in my brain. Like, this is VHS 85. It is Techno God. And I thought it was funny on the first watch, but it's sort of universally recognized that this is not only the worst segment within this film, but it is one of the worst segments in the entire franchise. I like it just for, like, cheesy reasons, but I acknowledge that this is not a good segment. This is not a good segment at all. It's basically a one-woman show telling an audience of people who looked very, very thrilled to be there that technology is bad. She basically has, like, 2 power gloves. She's got a Virtual Boy on her head. This should have been sponsored by Nintendo. And it's basically her just showing how technology is bad and where technology is going to be in the future. Miles is featured in this segment. Midnight Miles drinking his digital coffee. A true legend of the era. I cannot believe Midnight Miles had a cameo in this film as the creator of these techno goggles and stuff. He actually has them at his house. And basically, the girl puts on the stuff. She's walking around the digital world, and basically, spoiler alert for the worst segment, but basically she gets fucked up by a PS1 graphics demon. It's literally a TurboGrafx 16 demon. Like, this demon looks like shit. Like, and obviously she's getting fucked up in the digital realm, which translates to her getting fucked up in the real world, and everyone thinks it's just part of the show. So they actually are getting involved in this, and basically the girl, like, gets her face ripped out and stuff like that, and it's a little bit gory. So I enjoy this segment for what it is, but I acknowledge that this segment, like, when you look at it on paper, when you're watching it, it sucks. Like, it's really bad, but, like, part of me has a soft spot for it just because it is so funny and so ridiculous, and this is the segment that I think of when I think of VHS 85 as Techno God. But I do acknowledge it is undoubtedly the worst segment, at least out of these. There's a few segments in VHS Viral that are pretty bad, but as far as, like, the ones with the years, like VHS, 94, 99, and 85. This one is definitely in the bottom 2 or 3 segments. Like, I still hate that segment in 1984 with the fucking Transformers underground. Like, that one was piss poor terrible. But this one is right there with that in terms of quality. Not my least favorite segment in the VHS franchise, but definitely, probably when you look at it on paper, it's the worst or one of the worst. Checking back up with Rory for the 4th time, 4 times out of 6. Rory's actually going pretty fucking bonkers in this one. He's sprouting a bunch of tentacles and is definitely really looking less human. And everyone's kind of wondering if they made a mistake or like what's going on. Again, it's another short one. But basically he's starting to look a little messed up. Rory's starting to look a little crazy. Next segment is Ambrosia. And for those of you that were just dying to know more of the lore and more of what happened in the first segment, No Wake, this is your answer for it. As far as me and what I'm looking for out of this, it's just boring. It's lame. I do like in concept that it ties in with another segment, which is unique for the franchise, but those 2 segments just don't do it for me at all. Out of the first several segments, the only thing that's keeping me invested is the wraparound. I do enjoy the wraparound in this, and I enjoy parts of Techno God, but No Wake, Ambrosia, and the God of Death, like none of these segments really do it for me at all. It just comes off really boring, really bland. And again, it comes off more like action-y, more like an action thriller. I'm not going to give away any specific plot points about this one since it is like a direct follow-up to another segment within the same film, so we'll keep it a little bit more of a mystery if you haven't seen the film yet. But I don't like it. It doesn't do it for me. Doesn't do it for me at all. Checking back in with Rory for part 5 of Total Copy. It becomes apparent to the group that while he's been observed by the scientists, Rory has been observing them as well. And they realize this because Rory starts to mimic the faces of one of the scientists when he has never had any exposure to him. So Rory knows what these people look like. Rory knows what they've been saying about him, and he's starting to get pissed. So it really leaves you on a good cliffhanger while we feature the final segment that's not wraparound. The final standalone segment of this, it really leaves you wanting more. So you're invested in this wraparound. Coming up for Dream Kill, which is by far the best segment that we've gotten in this film besides the wraparound. It is by far the best standalone segment. They saved the best for the end. It has a character in it that is so 80s. As I said, there is a goth character in it, but everything surrounding him, it does make attempts to feel 80s. It's called Dream Kill, and so what does Dream Kill mean without giving too much away about the plot twists within this? Basically, it is a police procedural where people are getting murdered through a cameraman's POV, but the cameraman isn't necessarily filming anything, but they're watching it play out on film because there's a character in the film that can see events in his dreams, in his brain, before they happen. So what's happening is the police station is getting VHS tapes sent to them of murders that have not taken place yet. So there's a lot of cool interweaving stories about that. They explain how this person is able to record their dreams onto a VHS tape. So this segment by far is the most 80s. It is the most fun. I really like this segment. I really like the segment Dream Kill. And I don't want to say too much about it without giving away stuff about it. But it's by far the highest quality standalone segment within this film is Dream Kill. If you were to make a film just called like VHS, like Through the Years or something stupid, I mean, I'm just making this up in my head, but there's elements of these trilogy of films, because I consider VHS 94, 99, and 85, since those are the year ones, I'm considering that a trilogy. If you were to take certain films from each of these, you could have like a 4.5, 5-star fucking film. If you were to take the best couple segments from each of just these 3 films, like not counting the original trilogy or what they're going to do next, but there is a good film within VHS 94, 99, and 85. There is a great film within them. But the problem is that there's so many low points in all of them that you have to weed through what you want it to be. You have to weed through it. Maybe someday, I've always wanted to do a ranking of every segment within VHS. Maybe I'll do a ranking of every segment, and it would also be good to sort of restructure the films and make a best of VHS and keep it like with the trilogies, like taking segments from the first 3 and making one great film, taking segments from the second 3, making it a great film. And obviously after VHS Beyond, they're going to be making more than that. They're going to make more every fucking Halloween probably. So I would love to do that someday. But regardless, Dream Kill is great. Let's talk about the ending to Total Copy. And basically, what happens is exactly what you think is going to happen. Obviously, chaos starts ensuing. I'm not going to say who the final victor is. I'm not going to say all of the aspects of what chaos is going on. But basically, as we said, Rory's pissed, and he's going to start taking out his revenge. I love the shot where the camera guy's body is being dragged by Rory's tentacles around. That's great. The final moments of this are hilarious. It's only a couple seconds long, the final moments, but it ends on a funny little joke, which I liked. I liked that in contrast to VHS Beyond. In contrast, the ending of this is worth it. This wraparound, it gives you a nice, good amount of time at the end to wrap up the story. VHS Beyond, seriously, the end of the wraparound is like fucking 10 seconds. It's absolutely abysmal. It looks cool when it's happening, but the audience who has sat through the first 100 minutes of this film, they deserved more with that wraparound. This one gives you something. No matter how you feel about the segments within, the wraparound in this, the ending is good. I like it. I love Total Copy and Dream Kill, genuinely. Techno God, I like for the goofy aspects, but the rest of this film, I could do without. I could do without the rest of this film. That's pretty much all I have to say about VHS 85. We also got into a little bit of the lore. I mean, I enjoyed doing this episode. I was a lot more level-headed than I thought I would be doing this episode. But yeah, I love it. I mean, I was hoping that people were going to look more 80s in it. I mean, I was hoping the quality of the segments were going to be better. Even though the segments don't feel 80s, I'm judging them based upon just how good the segments are. They're just not good segments in this film, and it sucks to say. But that's pretty much all I have to say about VHS 85. I don't know why it took me so fucking long to record this podcast. I don't know why I was stressing about it so much. This was a good episode to do. I liked it. I liked doing this episode. I liked, even though I didn't like the film, I wasn't ranting about it, I don't feel. I mean, you tell me in the comments if I was ranting. I didn't feel as if I was like freaking out. I feel like I was giving solid reasons on why I didn't like things. But I want to know what you think. If you thought this film was a 4-star film, and there's a lot of you guys out there that really like this film, I want to know why. Like, I want to know what you liked about this film. So let me know down in the comment section below if you're over on YouTube or on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. However you can get in touch with me, let me know. If you look in the description of all my videos, I have how you can reach me. I also have a voicemail number if you want to leave me a voicemail. But with that, we're just going to wrap up this episode. Well, that is about it, you guys. Obviously, that about wraps things up here. If you guys have anything else you need to say about VHS 85, definitely get in touch with me however you can get in touch with me. We're going to wrap up this episode right off into the sunset. So if you guys haven't already, please make sure you're subscribing to the show wherever you get your show. Leave me a 5-star rating and a review. And we'll see you guys back here tomorrow for another episode of Buddy's House of Horror. So take care, everyone, and stay spooky.